And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. On this Econ podcast, we're going to work with the production possibilities model. And so, just a quick reminder of how economists model and think about the world. The first step is that economists always begin by making assumptions. So, step number one is economists always are going to make some assumptions about the world, things that they're going to pretend that are true, even if they're not. So these are simplifying assumptions, and we made assumptions with the production possibilities model. I'm focusing on these top two right now. We are assuming that resources, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial skills are fixed, and we are assuming that technology is fixed. Clearly, these things are not fixed in the real world, but we are going to pretend that they are. Step number two is then, based on those assumptions, we build a model. We build a model about how we think that the world works. And then finally, step number three is we allow those assumptions to change. Another way to say this is we drop the assumptions. We allow the assumptions to change. So we stop assuming that resources are fixed. We stop assuming that technology is fixed, and then watch what happens. So the goal is to see the results of what happens in the model if we drop the assumptions, if there's some sort of change in the world. So let's go ahead and look at some examples of how to do this, and I'm just going to run through a few. The first one is going to be based on the Robinson-Crusoe model that we have talked about on a previous podcast. And on the Robinson-Crusoe model, we said that this guy, Robinson Crusoe, was trapped on an island, and he could produce two goods, and they were butter and guns. And so we had butter on the horizontal axis, we had guns on the vertical axis, and then we had the production possibilities curve. And the production possibilities curve showed the different combinations of butter and guns that Robinson Crusoe was able to produce. And now what we're going to say is that there's going to be some change that's going to happen on the island. So right now we're assuming fixed resources. When we draw this production possibilities curve, we are assuming that resources are fixed, that land is fixed, labor is fixed, capital is fixed, and entrepreneurial skills are fixed. And then, of course, we're assuming that technology is fixed. Those are all fixed when we draw this production possibilities curve. Now we're going to allow something to change. So I'm going to call that change a real-world event, some real event that happens in the world. And so the real-world event that happens in this example, we have Robinson Crusoe on the island all by himself, and this line represents the amount of various different combinations of guns and butter that he can produce. And in this famous passage in British literature, he's walking along the sand in the beach, and he sees a footprint, and it's not his, and wow, there's somebody else on the island. And the somebody else on the island turns out to be this guy that he names Friday. So this guy Friday is now on the island with Robinson Crusoe. So Robinson Crusoe was on the island all by himself, producing butter and guns, and now all of a sudden there's a new guy on the island, Friday. Now the question is, what are the ramifications economically of Friday being on the island? Well, to look at that, we look at what assumption changes in response to that real-world event. Which one of these assumptions that used to be held fixed are no longer going to be fixed? So I would say in this case, the example would be labor. So labor changes. We used to have just one person on the island, Robinson Crusoe, and now we have two people on the island, Robinson Crusoe and Friday. So Crusoe was trapped on the island by himself. Labor was fixed. It was just him. And now all of a sudden we've added a new person, Friday. And so my assumption, the way that I'm going to write this, I'm going to say that's a change in resources, labor. Change in resources, labor. So labor is the particular resource that has changed, and there's more of it than there was before. As a result of that, they are going to be able to produce more goods and services. Sorry, I should really just say more guns and butter. If I was being more abstract, I'd say goods and services. They will be able to produce more guns, more butter, and guns than could be produced when it was only Robinson Crusoe. So to show that on the island, to show that on the graph, I draw a new production possibilities curve. I'll call that PPC 2. Production possibilities curve 2. So production possibilities curve 1 is only Friday is on the island all by himself. I'm sorry, only Robinson Crusoe was on the island all by himself, and these are the combinations of guns and butter that he can produce. When Friday shows up, now he can produce more guns and butter. They can produce more guns and butter than before because of this extra labor on the island. So the production possibilities curve, we would say, shifts out to the right. And then we would say that that causes output. That means the production of butter and the production of guns. Output will rise. And more specifically, we would say, let's just pick a point here. Let's say this point right here. That point, when Crusoe was on the island by himself, that point was unattainable. He couldn't do it. It was outside of his production possibilities curve. Now with Friday on the island, now that point is not just attainable, but it's actually inefficient. Could have done even better. In fact, every single point in between these two curves used to be unattainable, and now it's attainable. So that's kind of one way to think about economic growth, is we are increasing the number, when the curve shifts to the right, we are increasing the number of production possibility sets or production possibility coordinates, or however you want to say it. So we are able to produce more than we could before. And so this model seems to predict that increases in population, adding people to the population, causes economic growth. Causes economic growth. That's how economists think. We take a cause or a change at the beginning and want to be able to predict the outcome or result at the end by running it through the economic model. We'll look at more examples of this on another podcast. Thanks for joining me. This has been Mr. Hagan on another Econ podcast. See you on the next podcast.